Streaming.
All right, let's see it. Let's see what we got.
We're streaming.
Yeah, but I want to see, make certain I can see us before I say it. Okay, so we are back for round 2 of today's long streaming event. Now, we were originally planning to do the whole, like, 12 or 13 hours together, but after talking quite loudly without pause for 4 hours or so and realizing we have to record some regular episodes tomorrow, my throat began to start hurting, so we had to take a break for a couple of hours. But we are back. And if you're wondering what this is again, today, of course, is Armistice Day. It's 100 years since the end of the First World War in the field, when it's the last regular episode of my other channel, The Great War, and we thought we'd sort of tie these two together, the end of the Great War's regular series, and talk a little bit about the beginning of World War II, and answer all of your questions. So you can keep your questions coming and coming and coming, and obviously people have been writing to us, patrons have been writing there, and they get priority, right? So, but we'll answer what we can for the next few hours. Sparty,
that's right, and we need your help to get the word out, because one of the purposes of today's exercise is also to try to get the word out about that we're doing World War II. As many of you, you're going to find out who the woman is in a moment, Fidel. One of the purposes of doing this tonight is that we want to try to get the word out that we're doing World War II. We just finished, or Indy just finished doing World War I.
Well, the regular ones. There's still some specials to come.
We're going to tell you the story about how that happened in a little bit, and why the 4 of us are here, and what we had to do with the whole thing and whatnot. I think it's really important to remember, and that's what I'm going to start with asking here as well. I'm going to start with the topic, what the motivation is for us to do this. But before we do that, let me shortly introduce the whole team here that's sitting here right now. Now, this is not the same team, the whole team that did World War I, because the Great War was produced by a company that Astrid and I founded many years ago, called Mediacraft, which we have since left. We produced the show. Astrid was in charge of production there, and I was the CEO of that company for a long time. And we produced it until 2016. We came up with the idea together with Indy, but Indy was really the one who did it all the way through, and he stuck to the very bitter end.
It's still not over yet. Well, I mean, the war in the field is over, but there's a lot of stuff to cover. But we are doing World War II, and I'm not doing the World War II with a big network or anything, because we figure if we're going to do such a multi-year project that takes so much work and takes so much of your life. I mean, really, I wrote and hosted the largest documentary ever, basically, and now we're doing a bigger one. We'd like to own the rights ourselves. Nothing against Mediacraft. It was great that they financed the Great War, and I knew going into it that I wasn't going to own the rights. No problem with that. But for this, I definitely want to have it be mine, to own it as mine.
So that's why we founded Mediacraft together. So, we founded TimeGhost. Well, Astrid and I founded Mediacraft with a bunch of other people. We're not doing that again. But so a year ago, we decided that we were going to come together and we were going to do what we have wanted to do for a long time.
A million years.
At least.
Yes.
I think it was more.
Yeah. But we count years like Bible years, so they sound a lot more than they really are.
Yeah. And we're also confused about the translation from Aramaic, so we get years wrong all the time.
We were going to do World War II entirely in Aramaic. That would be a hell of a project, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it actually only failed on the translation workflow. Otherwise, we would have done it.
Yeah.
But we couldn't get the Aramaic translation in time, so we ended up with English. Yeah. But so a year ago, we decided that we were going to do TimeGhost instead, for the very reason that Indy said, but also because we want to be in control of what we do next. So when we were at Mediacraft, although I was the CEO and Astrid was a co-founder and she was the head of production and everything that goes in that direction, we still could not decide what we were going to do without the buy-in of all of the other executives and whatnot, and it proved to be a really hard and difficult journey that we don't want to repeat. And we want to be able to make sure that we give you all of the best possible content and what we're also very passionate about. We're going to talk more about that as the stream goes on tonight, what our visions are, what we have in store for you for the future. We want to hear what you guys want. This is really what this is about. So here we are, and this is the team. So to my furthest left, Yoram, who is the most recent arrival to our team. Actually, Yoram is on board full-time with the Time Ghost project since only a week. And that week he spent on vacation, cleverly.
Typical Dutch.
So today and yesterday, well, yesterday was his first full working day, actually, oddly enough on a weekend, which compensates for the holiday anyway. And Yoram takes care of all of our social media stuff, but also very heavily focused on research. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself.
He's a historian as well. So
he is. Very important that we have that focus. We've discovered that just understanding social media is not enough. You have to understand history to work with us. Now, Astrid is our producer. She's, I would say, the boss. She decides what we do with the money. She decides what we look like. And while she doesn't get involved with the content, because she has a high amount of respect for indies and my integrity when it comes to saying what we need to say.
And nobody wants to piss me off. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. We should quote the Hulk more often.
I think we should, definitely. I'm green today, especially because of that. I knew Indy was going to do that, so I got dressed in green.
I didn't know I was going to do it. You know me too well. And of course, I'm Indy Nidell. I do the research and writing and presenting for World War II. Sparty is doing the writing for the Between Two Wars series when we have time to do it, and the more money we raise, and we can get more editors and stuff like that, then he'll be able to focus more on that, so that'll be able to come out more often than once a month or whatever it's been coming out right now. Yeah.
And if you're wondering, we have a fly problem here. We've had Indian summer, and suddenly all of the flies came out, so they're a little bit of an infestation. And there another one bites and does.
Have you guys ever seen a confused fly? Because we had to do a filming thing last summer in Luxembourg, and the doors were open, and when we got back to the car to drive all the way to Bavaria, there were like 1 million flies in the car. We got rid of as many as we could. But we just had to drive, down to Bavaria with whoever was in them. When we opened the door here, we separated them from their families, from their friends. When we got here, you could actually, the flies were like, where the hell am I? Quite interesting. Yeah.
So I see that it's 11 o'clock right now in Texas. So happy
Texas.
Remembrance Day in Texas. And Indy, of course, has a special relationship to Texas since he's there.
Because I'm from Texas.
I'm going to move on to what this segment is about. And I'd actually like to start with Astrid, ladies first. As you can understand, there's a lot of reasons why we do this. But I think one of the most important ones is that we feel very passionate about learning from the past. But we also have personal views on all of that and how we interpret that. So Astrid, tell us, why do you think it's important that we do Time Ghost? What's your personal motivation behind this? And what do you think is the most important thing that we cover?
I think you can learn a lot from history. You can make your decisions for the future if you know what went on in the world. And I think the life of people that have already gone is always an example of for young people to find their own path. And the more you know about everything that was going on, I think you find the energy to do it better, to not make the same mistakes, to have better decision making. Yeah, and I think it's fascinating. And I want to honor people that have actually committed their life to a cause that was not really their own, but that actually made it their course. And this is why we want to do different project with Time Ghost. Like, I would be very happy to do the Vietnam War.
The Korean War, too.
And the Korean War. I think that all these guys that died, they deserve it. They deserve to be talked about. So that was not for nothing. Yeah, that's more or less what I think.
So, tying on to what ADAW, before I move on, I'm going to interject with a little short thing here. Where are all the Swedish accents? Well, I think that's an interesting thing. We're a completely multinational team here. So Yoram is Dutch, and he lives in Holland and he works from there. Astrid is German, but spent a lot of time in England as well. So that's why she has this sort of Germano-English accent.
And whenever she refers to the mayor of a town, wherever it is, she calls him the Lord Mayor, and I really like that. And no, but I'm trying to train myself to do that because I think it's much better when they're the Lord Mayor of Houston
the Lord Mayor.
and stuff.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
But Indy's obviously from Texas, but lives in Sweden.
Stockholm, Sweden.
Stockholm, Sweden, yes.
Yes.
And I was born in Stockholm, Sweden, but I didn't grow up there. I grew up, well, part of the time I actually grew up in Sweden. I spent some time there, but I spent my time between France and Sweden. And my first language is English, or my language of choice. I acquired both at the same time. I have somewhat of an odd Euro-American accent, and I jumble the words, and my grammar is kind of pan-European, but that's the way it is.
So no friends.
Yeah, sadly enough. So that leads me.
And we're in Bavaria. This is where This is the studio that we built the last year. This is just so we could do it all ourselves. So I come down here every 5 or 6 weeks, and we film 5 or 6 weeks worth of World War II, whatever between two wars, or World Dictionary is ready, and whatever TimeGhost cribs and stuff we have to do. That's how that works.
Yes, Levantian, we know that the Lord Mayor of London is not the same as the Mayor of London, but Astrid takes such a great pride in the Lord Mayor title for anyone.
Lord Mayor Spartacus Olsen, wow.
Thank you, Auntie.
Lord Vader Indy. Yeah. Oh, that guy. But he posts all the time on the Great War and stuff. He's one of my favorites.
It's Valente.
Yeah.
Anastasio. Well, hello, Valente. Nice to see you. So that leads me right away to Yoram. So Yoram, you joined us most recently, and we had a great talk when we started doing that. And of course, you already spent some time interning at the Great War,
yeah.
which led you to your master's. In history, did a master's in history and social media and history. So what are your motivations, well, first of all, for joining the team, and second of all, how do you feel about what we do, and what is it that drives you? What's your passion for all of this?
Oh, wow, okay. Okay, I start off with my passion, which started when I was 13 years old, and I went to Ypres with my parents, and I was overwhelmed by the First World War and the massive graveyards and the historical sites. And at that point, I knew I wanted to do something with history in my life. I didn't, though. I ended up studying journalism, after which I worked as a freelance journalist for a while. But I returned to history because I really liked it, and I did my master's in history. And as Spartacus told you, I ended up interning at the Great War, because I think the Great War did a really good job in tying together the scientific history part with public history. So doing public history means, as an historian, reaching out to lots of people via the internet or TV or whatever, and especially making use of their community and their research, making the Great War, and what we're planning as well, making this a community-driven project. Yeah, so that's why I'm here. I really like the concept of creating a community which has so much more to offer than just the information that we can get from history books, in terms of footage or images or public-private collections or knowledge or access to archives or to sources in different languages, which we now can use if we succeed in, well, involving you all in our project. Yeah.
Yes, I have to say my passion comes from actually wanting to help these two brains, you know, to have a platform, because I mean, really being together with these guys is not very easy, because when you think, okay, I have a pretty good memory, you're nothing against these guys, right? Yeah. You can just...
My memory's so good, I remember things didn't even happen.
You know, and what I thought...
My memory's so fast, I make up things while I go along.
Yeah, blah, blah. Yes, but you know, these two guys are like two human encyclopedia, right? Yeah. And I think because there is so much passion, you know, when you sit with them and have dinner and it goes back and forth and who did what and when and blah, right?
It's fun.
It is a lot of fun. And this is what I thought, you know, these two guys have to have a platform that really stays for humanity, you know, because, you know, humanity has to know what you know.
That's very kind of you, Astrid. And that leads me immediately to Indy, because Indy's just finished off the World War, the Great War, the First World War.
It's not entirely finished, just the war in the field is finished.
No, but I meant the last main episode went up today, and I mean, your writing work is pretty much done.
That was sad.
And of course, you added a lot of memory. So I have 2 questions. The first one is, how do you feel? And the second one is, what was your greatest takeaway from 4 years of doing the Great War?
I'm still not entirely certain how I feel. When we filmed the episode that came out today, the November 11th, the last regular chronological episode a couple weeks ago in Berlin, I was walking around Berlin afterwards. That's where we filmed the Great War, is Berlin. We're in Bavaria for this. And I was just like, I had this like ache, you know, like here. There were tears, because I have... It's been a lot of work, you know, but it's like, but you know, this is the biggest thing I've ever done. And this is, with all the things I've ever done and accomplishments I'm proud of or whatever in my life, this is this is number 1 right now. This is my baby. I mean, 20 years from now, I can still look back and go, I wrote that. And I did that, for better or worse. If people say, I love when people say, I have a problem with this issue. Your team of researchers did this. I'm like, I'm my team of researchers, you know? But,
So there was actually a question up front, and we're going to answer many of your questions from up front later on, but one of them was, are you burnt out? Do you need a break?
No. My mother actually asks me that like every 6 months or so, following the Great War. She was like, you know, I enjoy the series and stuff, and I enjoy watching it, but I just don't understand how you can talk about all that death and all that, I guess, waste sometimes of lives week after week. Well, you can, and it's not, you don't get inured to it or immune to it like people talk about, you know, the generals of the actual Great War, anything like that. I'm not burnt out. I wouldn't be already doing World War II. It has been, the last few months, I have been burning myself out researching and writing 2 world wars at the same time. That's an awful lot of work, but I don't have very much to do with the Great War left. As for things to take away from it, today it is a day of joy, sure, but it should be a day of remembrance, because, you know, our world was built on the backs of the events that happened. And when the Great War ended, we had gone from a world, an imperial and colonial world, into what was slowly becoming a post-colonial world, but a world full of multiple isms. Fascism, communism, republicanism, isolationism, globalism, pacifism, futurism, modernism, you name it. There's a zillion more. And many of these, even the ones that had seen the light of day before, had never been big, had never had a world platform. Like communism, for example. And all of these were now, in the 20s, were actually fighting an enormous battle. And all of these isms became prominent building blocks for the world that we live in today. And it's not just, you know, you can't do the future if you can't remember the past. That is true in a future. I mean, that is true in a sense. But of course, even if you know nothing about history, you will still have a future. You're not going to drop off the face of the earth. But to build a brighter future, learning from the successes and the failures from the past, and even intentionally repeating some of the same failures to achieve some of the same successes, these are all important. And I hope that that's what I can communicate through these series. You know?
We got a follow-on question that fits into that. Unfortunately, it scrolled up, so I can't see who gave it, but honor to you. And that is, how are we going to cope with dealing with the horrors of World War II day by day, week by week, year by year for 6 years? I'll answer my bit to it, and then I'll let Indy answer it, and Yoram and Astrid, you can chime in if you want as well. But from my point of view, there are 2 parts to that. First of all, if we don't do that, who will do it? We have to look into our past and examine ourselves, and there's a certain responsibility there that we have as documentarians, as historians, to look at those things and actually try to share them with everyone. On top of it, I think it really has a lot to do with passion, where it came from. Personally, I'm not a learned historian. I'm an autodidact historian, but I've been studying history since I was 7 years old, and I started studying the Holocaust when I was 10 years old. And at some point, you might think that you get numbed from these things. You don't. There are days when I'm editing episodes for the current World War II series where I really have to take a pause, take a breath, and go out, because I'm watching so much horror and I'm seeing so many terrible pictures of suffering that it just gets to you. It grinds you down. But you get back to it really fast because, first of all, it's our passion. And second of all, you really remind yourself every minute that you spend doing this that it's important that we remember, that we don't forget. However cliche that is, you know, the good old term, lest we forget. And that, at least, is what drives me forward. I don't know how it is with you, Indy.
Well, that was a decent enough explanation for that. You have to chronicle the horror. Okay, for example, like with the Great War, when the series really got going and started getting popular, people would say, this is a really cool series. It's not a cool series. It's an interesting series, and hopefully it's a series that you can take something away from, but it's not cool when millions of people die. And it's even less cool when millions of people are dying, not even fighting, who can't fight for themselves. And that has to be not forgotten. That has to be brought to the light of day. Now, we're going to do that a little differently on the World War II channel, where although I will be talking about the various atrocities committed in various nations by nations of both sides, or all sides, in the Second World War, we will have a separate series on the war against humanity, for the simple reason that we already know, just based on the past, that when we talk about, I don't know, if we talk about the rape of Nanking, if we talk about the Holocaust, if we talk about the purges in the Soviet Union, there's going to be, well, think of the comment section on any channel and stuff, and think of, you do get a lot of people with extreme opinions on both sides who will be flaming each other in the comments. You know that's going to happen, from either apologists or people that think it was a good idea for whatever thing we're talking about. So we're going to keep that off of the main World War II channel, just so we don't sabotage our own channel. So it'll be a separate thing. That's how we'll cover it. But of course, as we have already done so far, it'll be touched on in the regular episodes.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something to that?
Well, I have a personal relation to that, because I've only heard it from my everything that went on in the Second World War. I heard from my parents. My father was building hospitals and whorehouses.
It's a brilliant story, the story of her father, who fought with the German army in World War II.
He did, yes. He was in the Wehrmacht. And my mother was full of stories, because she lived in Münster that was really bombed to pieces. And when I was a kid, I listened to all these stories that didn't really mean anything to me, because it was just stories my parents told me. My father was very quiet about the whole thing. But on his 96th birthday, as you remember, I asked him, and I have already put this, I put it on tape at that time. I said, Dad, I don't know anything about your life because you don't talk, right? He was we always called him the Buddha, because he was not talking. And he started talking because he was born in 1913. He started talking how he had to flee during the First World War when he was a kid, and what he experienced in the Second World War, and how he got into custody, and it was very, very touching, I have to say. It was very, very touching. All the different feelings he had to go through, and when he came back, and what it meant to his parents, and his mother starved to death. I mean, it's very personal for me, I have to say. And I hope I can honor his life a little bit. I know that everybody hates the Germans, of course, right? I mean, they have good reason to. But out of a personal perspective, I know the other side. I know my uncle He died in the German army with 24. He was in Yugoslavia, and he was standing in water for 2 hours, 2 weeks, so that his body rotted. And, you know, I know all these stories, and yeah, I have a very, very personal angle to do this.
Well, you know, it's funny that you say that about everybody hates the Germans. One thing we were very committed to with the Great War was to not tell the story that there are good guys and bad guys. These guys are the good guys, these guys are bad guys. No, there were enemies, there were opponents. They had different world visions. They had different types of government, different ideas for how they would like their nation or Europe or the world to look. But, and it's funny because you hear all the time, oh, history is written by the victors. That may have been, definitely was a lot more true 100 years ago than it is now. 100 years ago, you got your news, if you lived in a small town, you got your news from the local newspaper. That was it. There's no radio, there's no television, there was no internet. You didn't have alternative sources except people that maybe had traveled and could bring back some other news, whether it was hearsay or like Chinese whispers or whatever, or something else. It's a lot easier now to find multiple perspectives from multiple sides of a conflict. Now, Sparta, you said this morning, when talking about the World War II, again, trying to do this again, not so much saying there are good guys and bad guys. Can you explain how you said this morning?
Sure. I mean, let me, and actually I'll take off from where Astrid, and yes, I was laughing at the comments, but I was also listening to her. I'll start from where Astrid was going about her dad, and answering another question, the one I was laughing at. No, I'm not single, and neither is Astrid, since you asked about both of us, because we're married.
What?
Yes. Sparty and Astrid are married, yeah.
Yeah, and so we were talking about my father-in-law at the end of the day that we talked about, and it was odd because I got a really good relationship with him over the years, and he never opened up about the war, even to his children, to my brother-in-law and to Astrid, but he did open up to me because I spent my life studying this war. And he understood that I understood what was going on, and we had a lot of talks about that. And one of the things that came out of that was the respect that he had for the Allies and the respect that they had back to him. And it really became clear after the war was over. So he spent only a few months, not that long. He was captured by the British Army in northern Germany, on his way, retreating away from Lithuania, actually. And was captured, and he was put in a prisoner of war camp for a few months, where he got to know the camp commanders and the people who were actually the guards in the camp. But not only that, there was a lot of Russian, Soviet troops, Red Army troops that were not too far away from there, and he got to know them as well. Now, the remarkable thing is that they stayed friends for the rest of their lives. Both the Red Army troops that he got to know and the British troops that he got to know, they shared the same drama, and it didn't matter if they were on opposite sides and if they were on different sides. So come the 1970s, when there was a little bit more openness between West Germany and Russia, he took several months off from work, and he toured Russia and visited all the people that he'd gotten to know during the war, both when he was on the front and later on when he was in captivity. Yeah. And his friends in the English army stayed friends with him the rest of his life and learned how to speak English as well while he was in the camp. He was a very smart guy. And eventually, during the occupation of Germany, the British troops were stationed in and around Düsseldorf, where they lived, and he was with the German army again. Eventually, after 1948, when West Germany was refounded, and then in the 50s when the army was reinstituted, and they worked together. So that leads me back to what Indy asked me to clarify, which is that the more you look at this, there is not a good and a bad side in the war. There's actually no good side in a war, because once you've ended up in the situation of war, you have already failed in being the good guy, because you have been forced to resort, or you have chosen to resort to violence. And killing each other just is not a good thing. Now, of course, you can talk about what's justified and who's more justified. And then you're talking about the war between the justified cause and the not justified cause. And even there, we get confused in World War II, simply because, yes, the Nazis and also the Axis powers in general, they were fighting in order to establish absolutism, and they were fighting to establish murderous, oppressive powers. And that is a terrible thing, and it is a worthwhile cause to fight that, without a doubt. But not everybody on the Allied side was fighting in order to stop that. There were parts of the Allied side, the Soviet Union obviously, that were fighting to uphold an oppressive and a murderous regime. So the lines between good and bad and evil and righteous, they're all blurred, and it becomes very difficult. And we have to realize that this struggle was not a struggle of good versus bad. It was the failure of many, many decades, possibly centuries, of politics that led to a breakdown of the world where there was, without a doubt, a good cause and a bad cause. But it was not a good cause and a bad cause that was divided along clear lines on both sides. And of course, you know, and this is another thing that Indy and I were talking about later on in the stream this afternoon, you know, you are never justified to murder millions of people. It's not out of a 2018 perspective. Morality is a relative thing, and we have to always consider that. And we're talking about history. They were different times. People thought in a different way. But today, in 2018, we can safely say that it is not justifiable to commit murder on any level, especially not the murder of millions of people. And then somebody asked, well, what about Stalin, who saved millions of people? Out of his viewpoint, I'm not arguing against or for, I'm just saying that was the question we got. And the other one was, what about Churchill, who caused millions of deaths in India? And our answer to that is that it doesn't really matter what your reasons were. It's just not okay. It doesn't matter if you're Churchill, Stalin, or whoever you were. It's not okay to kill millions of people. And once you've ended up in the situation where you feel that this is what you're forced to do in order to achieve your goals, you have already failed. And you have failed your own goals and morality.
I'm thinking, since we've been on for half an hour, maybe we should start taking some of the questions from people.
Absolutely.
I have some questions from some of the patrons here.
But wait, just a moment, because I think we want to give Yoram, first of all, we need Yoram's support behind the camera, and we want to give them a chance to. Is there anything more that you want to tell the community before we change the focus to the questions from the community that Indy and I will start fielding?
Well, regarding, I just want to go back to what we just spoke about, what your reasons are to cover this subject. For myself, having had a beautiful youth in the Netherlands, really peaceful there, but I was confronted with these wars, the First World War, the Second World War, at the age of like 13, and the idea that human beings can do that to each other still scares me every now and then, especially when there's well, things happening today that I couldn't believe are still happening based on history. So that is a huge motivator for me to keep telling what happened and how it happened, so that we are aware that we are capable of doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Jerome, a bunch of people, or somebody keeps writing in louder and louder, wondering if you're single.
How do you keep?
They write with more capital letters. They now it's just there's just your. Next time it's going to be, are you single?
He's single.
I'm single.
Yeah.
He is single, and somebody loves the Netherlands too.
Oh, cool.
So
I do too.
That's a good combination, isn't it?
we will be doing merch. Whoever wrote that and stuff, probably during the next year when we'll start doing specials, of course, as it is now, since we are the entire team. Oh, we have a new guy helping with editing, and we have Ben also. What's it?
Ben. Well, it's Wieke. It's Wieke in Holland, and it's Ben Alorenshaw in Australia.
And
so wait, before we want to get to those questions. So Astrid, was there anything you wanted to add?
No.
Okay, great. So now we're going to switch to start really getting historical dating channel. Yeah, well, we're going to get there. so, but do you actually want to date people of history, or do you want to date other history-minded people?
I always like the question when people say, "Okay, if you could have a 10-minute talk with anyone, living or dead, who would you choose?" And I would choose living.
What?
Yeah, because they're not very interesting when they're dead. What?
Yeah.
I'll get my coat. I'll get my coat. No, but there were some questions from patrons. That I thought
we're gonna get to that right now, and we're switching to that camera.
This camera?
There we are,
All right.
and here we are, and I'll give you
All
that.
right. Okay.
I'll help your arm, so we're gonna set that up, and then I'll
So
be with you in a second.
Right, I can start answering some of these things. But these are some of the patrons that write, and of course you can join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or at patreon.com, TimeGhost, and then you get to ask these questions that get priority over the questions there. Sparty, I cannot read questions off the screen right now at the moment. You have something of a... Okay, Owen Emery asks, will it be possible to divide episodes into different theaters? Well, I don't know if you've noticed why we already, I mean, I'll talk about the European War and talk about the Sino-Japanese War in the same episodes. We will sometime, I'm guessing in the late spring next year, have to start going to 2 regular uploads every week, because even writing stuff during the phony war, even writing the December episodes, it's nearly too much to edit down for just 1 week, talking about what's happening in the Far East and what's happening in Europe. And then when we get to the African theater and we have the Balkans as well and we have Stalingrad, then it's going to be pretty much. Let's see. Ex-Nympho asks, how vain am I? Grade myself on a scale from 1 to 10. I suppose I'd give myself a 7 or 8, probably. I can be fairly vain. I could think about things like that. Are we going to cover the aftermath of the Armenian genocide? Well, in what way? Not on the World War II channel. I mean, in Between Two Wars, we definitely, which will come out fairly soon, which is an episode that backtracks to that and also covers the Greco-Turkish War. And it covers it in exhausting depth. It's going to be a really long episode because it's really tough to give fair play to every side in that conflict. But am I single? I'll never tell.
He's single!
Of course I can tell. So, well, okay. Oh, wait, I had another couple. And, Jorm, you're going to send me some more questions here, yeah?
Yeah, sure.
What was the hardest part in setting up the World War II show? Honestly, it was money. It was getting it together to... We built this studio. Well, Sparty and his godson built it literally from the ground up. They laid the foundation. We had to get the cameras and monitors and the lights and get together the set and everything like that. The research and writing is fairly straightforward since I have 4.5 years of experience writing a world war. So I'm glad that I did not start with this war, though. That would have been a lot more difficult. It was good starting with the Great War. Is Yoram single? Yes, he is still single, as he was 5 minutes ago. So, Jesus Christ. Do we know when we're going to start Out of the Foxholes? That's going to be a community check thing. I'm guessing around January sometime. Again, we can't really have any more uploads per week until we can afford to have a larger crew. And people have been, the Patreon money is growing, and that's like 90% of our income, 95% of the income. So anybody that that wants to see us have more uploads, definitely tell them to support us on Patreon. And we did make some decisions, some rather drunken decisions last night. When we get to $15,000 a month, I was going to throw myself in the cold lake. And when I get to $20,000 a month, I will tattoo "Thank you, Time Ghost Patreons" somewhere on my body, but I get to choose where it is. However, what was it I was going to do if we got to 100,000 per month?
100,000. You were going to tattoo Cardona.
Cadorna.
Cadorna on your ass.
I like a tramp stamp of Luigi Cadorna. Oh God.
We actually said that when we hit 20,000, we even got Astrid to agree to this one. When we hit 20,000, we will tattoo somewhere. Thank you, Time Ghost patrons.
This is Scott Green asks, Indy, I loved your baseball series. Will there be more baseball specials during World War II? Well, anybody that saw Sunday Baseball or has talked to me for an hour knows that I'm a baseball historian, pretty much first and foremost. Maybe World War I counts in there as well. I do know a lot about that by now. Yeah, I definitely want to do more Sunday Baseballs. Again, once we have someone to take off the editing and stuff jobs, then we will have more time. He'll get back. He's writing the Between Two Wars series. I'm just hosting that. So we'll definitely get back to more Sunday baseball and stuff like that.
And while we're on that topic, like we said, I mean, we really want to make this grow, and I want to explain a little bit, just as an interlude here, with what why it's so important and why we depend so much on you. We covered this already this morning in some exhaustive detail, so I don't want to go into too much to it. But the fact is that with the level of income that you generate with advertisement on YouTube, there is no way that you can get a channel like this to work. You get about 50 cents per 1,000 views. So in order for us to cover our costs, we would have to get into the millions of views per episode. And that's just not going to happen. That's not realistic. We'd have to get into 8, 9, 10 million views per episode. That's not realistic.
Yes.
And, you know, you might think when you look at the Patreon page and say, well, these guys are getting $8,300 a month. That's a boatload of money. And of course it is. For each and every one of us personally, it's a lot of money. But when you're doing a company or you're doing a production, it's not that much money, because everyone you employ needs to be paid. They need to have an environment to work in. They need technology. They need equipment, everything that goes into it. And this really quickly eats into it. And of course, our goal is also to travel to locations of the stories that we tell, both in World War II and in the other formats that we do. And that immediately goes into heavy money. So we really depend on the support that we can get from Patreon. We're going to get into how sponsorships work and stuff like that. And that also means that we depend, and we've been so lucky. You guys have helped us so much already, but we really depend on getting the word out about the channel, because we don't have that many ways to advertise the channel or the channels, because we don't own the Great War, we can't advertise there and whatnot. So, and the same goes for this live stream. So anybody who's watching right now, please do post that this is going on. Go out there, share it, tell people that we're here so that they come in and join them. You know, we'll try to answer as many questions as we will. And then I'll shut up now. Go share it. Go share it.
Let's see.
And here's Indy with another question.
Do you guys use different language sources or just English ones? That's from V for Art. Okay. As many as we can. I mean, you know, English is my first and main language, so we have plenty of Western sources. We do have people that translate sources for us, and there are translated sources. For the Great War, for World War I, this was a lot trickier, because since it was a capitalist war to the Soviet Union, it was you know, verboten, and a lot of the records were destroyed. The Soviet records and a lot of the German records were destroyed in 1945 when they were bombed. There's a lot more primary source material for the Second World War than there was from the First World War. But, and this is interesting, something that people ask us all about. They ask us if we use modern sources, if we use primary sources, do we prefer one or the other? What's really interesting is to try and paint a picture, like with the Great War, for example, to try and paint a picture using, well, certainly modern sources right now that have their historiography of how the war went, sources from the 1920s that often have completely different opinions about the same events, even though the events were the same. And that's very interesting to see how the perspective has changed. And also, there's a great many primary sources, newspapers and people's diaries that are available online or in book form. The newspapers tend to be nationally biased, obviously, which is also interesting to seeing what people's perspectives of the same events were. We did, on the Great War, there was an episode, if you use the search function in the Great War channel, called the Falkenhayn Controversy, which I talked about a few hours ago, which is a really interesting example of using contemporary sources and modern sources. Erich von Falkenhayn, when he was chief of staff of the German army, he was the architect of the Battle of Verdun. Now, he maintained, you know, that charnel house, that slaughterhouse, he maintained that the purpose of the Battle of Verdun was not to force a breakthrough and not to beat the French or to, you know, break through to Paris or something like that. It was to bleed France white, to attack a national historical symbol that they would have no choice but to defend, even no matter how many men they lost. And everybody accepted that. You know, he said, oh, I wrote a Christmas memo to the Kaiser at the end of 1915 saying I was going to do this. And for the next 70 years, people pretty much accepted it. But now, a lot of people are realizing the only word we have for that is Erich von Falkenhayn's. We don't have the Christmas memo. Nobody's seen it. The Kaiser never mentioned it. And Falkenhayn did not talk about this as doing something before the Battle of Verdun. It was only later on, while the battle was already ruinous to both the German and the French armies, and people began thinking this might very well be a construct by Falkenhayn after the fact to try and explain away the massive German debts which rivaled the French debts. And this is how it's being taught in schools now. So you see the historiography change. So when I do the Great War, when I talked about that story, I have to present you both sides of that. I don't know for a fact which one is true. I'm more inclined to believe that it was an after-the-fact construct of Falkenhayn's. However, Falkenhayn also was very reticent with his subordinate officers. He often did not talk about his plans or the reasons for them. So it could have been his plan all along. So being inclined to believe that it was a construct by him after the fact is not the same thing as knowing it was a construct by him after the fact. So that is how we will definitely try to present the Second World War with the way the historiography has changed over the years.
I'm gonna field two questions at once here. One that Joram sent me, which is, do you use Mein Kampf as a source? And the other one was, how many people supported Hitler in Germany? They kind of go hand in hand in a different way. And it has to do with what Indy was just talking about, sources, original sources, and whatnot. Yes, of course we use Mein Kampf as a source. It is a source. It's a document. We've already quoted it a couple of times.
One of the December episodes, I have a quote.
Indy quoted it 2 or 3 times, I think, already. Yeah. Why would we use Mein Kampf? Well, because it's a document of Hitler's thought process. It's a document of what his intention was. And that is, in difference to a secondary source, which might tell you what Mein Kampf meant to say, it's the actual thing. So yes, we will use it. And that, interestingly enough, leads us to the second question, which is how many people supported Hitler during the war and, of course, before the war. And that gets more tricky. There we don't have any direct sources today, but historiography has developed so much, and there are so many new ideas for how to actually research history, that we can today answer that question with some certainty because of research that was made by a university. I forget which one now. I can give you the sources and whatnot at some other point. A university here in Germany that tried to work out the answer to that question, despite not having any polling numbers, despite not having any true background to it. There are several sources, but there's one source, and that's the Nazis themselves. They wrote a secret document called Nachrichten aus dem Reich, which was news from the Reich, not meant for the public, but meant for the Nazi leadership to work out how it did. And they actually reported themselves how support was going. And we can also work backwards. We can look at other documents, such as how many children were named after Nazi leaders during over time. Yeah. What was the number of obituaries from fallen soldiers that mentioned Hitler or the Nazi Party? And working backwards in that way, they've been able to actually fairly accurately pinpoint what the support for Hitler was. And I can give you the answer as well. Up until the 1st of September 1939, it was somewhere between 80 and 90%, fluctuating back and forth. That was the support level he had in Germany. You just have to face that. The moment the war broke out, people actually realized that he'd been not telling the truth. He was going to take them to a new war. And his support dropped instantly. So it dropped below 60% already on the first week of the war.
Because remember, the rhetoric he was using to unite all the German people, well, that made sense, the Anschluss with Austria, or trying to take, the Sudetenland from the Czechs. But then when you take the rest of Czechoslovakia and start attacking Poland, then you realize, no, that was not your plan. And you're lying.
So this is the kind of this is what modern historiography is giving us. It's giving us new ways of analyzing and getting sources out and finding out what's working. But just to finish the answer to the question, by the time the war ended, Hitler's support and support for the Nazis was well below 50%, going towards the 30% line, which would probably mean that the only people that supported Hitler by the end of the war were the dedicated and convinced Nazis, and everybody else had abandoned him. And that had already dropped to that level by the time that Operation Barbarossa had failed. So,
yeah. Shall we continue the questions?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
One of our next topic things. That
let's move in here.
Okay.
So again,
are the Nazis single? I love you guys.
Oh, you have a question that you have to absolutely answer from Robert, who seems to be really, really eager. He wants to know if you will do gay for pay.
Okay, let me explain to you how sponsorship works, and then I'll answer that question, okay? Because people have written in, like, for example, in the Great War, we had certain episodes that were sponsored. One was sponsored by an e-learning thing, the Great Courses Plus. A couple have been sponsored by games. And people write, you know, when I say, oh, this episode was sponsored by blah, 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 and I mention them, and maybe at the end of the episode I tell you how you can find them. People, you're letting people dictate your content, you sold out and stuff. That's not how sponsorship works. If you have a company and you make a war game that has to do with World War I or World War II, and you see there's that World War I channel and he's got nearly 1 million subscribers, I want people to know that my game exists. You come to me and you say, hey, here's some money. Can you tell people that my game exists? And I either say yes or no, depending on if I feel it's relevant to the channel. And then I say, the game exists. They do not come to me and say, here's some money, I'm going to tell you what to write and what to talk about. That is not how sponsorship works. Which is very much the answer to your question, do I do gay for pay? No, that's not how I work. Okay? All right.
Well, that was a good answer, Indy. Now, have you noticed any differences between U.S. and Swedish narratives of World War II? Or for that matter, of other nationalities? Which I think leads us immediately to Lithuania and Poland regarding the Polish-Lithuanian War and historiography.
Well, you can take that one, Kush, because you're the one that wrote about that. But sure, every nation has a different narrative. Every nation that fought in a war or even was neutral in that war has a different narrative for that war.
I mean, historiography is still very much a perspective from you know, it has to be a perspective with a certain subjective matter to it. We still haven't worked hard enough to get united international consensus about what's going on because we're still, well, still living a little bit off the food that was the old way of doing history, which is much more biased and much more...
Food.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing. So I think the best example to answer that question is specifically the difference between the Lithuanian and the Polish historiography when it comes to the Polish-Lithuanian War of 1921 or 2021. The fact of the matter is that they can't even agree on which war what battle belonged to. So in some cases they will attribute it to the Polish-Soviet War. In some cases they will attribute it to the Polish-Lithuanian War. Some battles they can't even agree what date they happened on and who was the winner. So yes, there are huge differences in national historiography.
It's funny you say that because when we were filming the Great War in Lviv in Ukraine, I could see myself swatting a fly. In Lviv in Ukraine, we were talking to, well, he was speaking in Ukrainian, it was being translated for us, to a Ukrainian First World War scholar. And he was talking about a battle which a lot of Ukrainians believe was a major, major battle in their history, and the Austro-Hungarian, as a victory for them, but the Austro-Hungarian Empire counted it as a victory for them, and the Russians don't even mention it. And this is, so these, yeah, you're going to, obviously, back then you're going to have more differences between the nations than you have now, because again, back then, you didn't have as many means of communications as you had now. You didn't even have radio. So.
And fact of the matter is that, I mean, one of our purposes is to actually try to give a new kind of view on things. And we're not the only ones. There are a lot of historians and universities, professors and researchers that are moving in the same direction. We're trying to move away from the national narrative to a more global narrative. That's why we want to cover the whole globe and whatnot. And that leads us to the question that I want to ask. What we've been asked by Jacob Clark. Would it be possible for you guys to travel beyond Europe for some episodes? Well, mentally we do that all the time, but
hopefully, sure. It's going to work exactly the same way it worked with the Great War. When the Great War got popular enough and raised enough money, we could go on the road. And first we started small. A couple of the guys came up to Sweden. We filmed some stuff there. And then we went to Poland because it was cheaper to go to Poland than to go to, for example, Britain. But eventually we went to, 11 different European countries to do filming there. We would love to do this globally for the Second World War. I mean, the East Asian and Pacific theater, I mean, it'd be great to go to Pearl Harbor or Okinawa. to go to North Africa and to El Alamein, talking about Stalingrad, to go through the Balkans, and of course the Western Eastern fronts. Absolutely. We would very much, my goal is to be able to go every 3 months to some location like that. Obviously, if we were going to the Pacific or we were going to the United States, that would probably be like a 2-week trip, and we'd film like 15 different specials, something like that. But that is very much the plan. It is the plan.
So, and that answers the question from John Kirk. Do you think the team will do fan meetups like the Great War had? Definitely. When we get to the point that we can afford to travel around, we will also meet up with you guys. We want to not only, we try to answer as many comments as we can. We're a small team, but we really, really appreciate the interaction, and we want to keep that up. So, and here's a question I think that I need to answer. Maybe you can give your opinion as well. And that's from Arch Stanton. What is our opinion about the colorization of war footage? I think there's not really a easy way to say it's bad or it's good. I think any way that you can make history more accessible to people is a good thing. And colorizing black and white pictures makes it more vivid, makes it easier to actually understand it. I haven't seen it yet. We got that question this morning if we'd seen Peter Jackson's.
Just seen the trailer, which looked great.
And of course, you only have to look at the trailer to realize that it's a great thing, because you immediately get a much more realistic feeling what's going on. Of course, it's a question of quality as well. If it's badly done, it just looks bad. But those are aesthetics. I don't really have anything against it. We've chosen on our Instagram day-by-day feed to not colorize pictures. The reason for that is aesthetic. It's not philosophical. We don't want to have certain pictures stick out more than the others. We want to have a kind of universal look for it so that you really get a feeling for the flow going through and all of that. So we decided we're going with black and white pictures there, while as we're trying to colorize as much as we can for the Second World War. Now, there are moments where that becomes difficult, because in some cases it's okay to have a picture that's half-assed colorized, and in some cases it's not. For instance, we used the picture of Mika Kasinyeva, the young girl who was photographed over her dead sister. We used that the first time we used that, or one of the pictures taken by Julian Bryant. We used a black and white picture because we had not seen any. I'd seen a lot of colorized pictures that we were allowed to use, but they were just not good enough, and it depreciated the quality of the picture. So we used the black and white ones because they were more telling. Eventually, we found a picture that was very well colorized and captured the drama of the situation the same way as the black and white ones did, so we used them. So there's no clear-cut answer, yes or no. It's a question of what the quality's like, what's the aesthetics, and how important it is.
One big difference between what we can use for the Second World War and what we had for the First World War is we have sound for the World War II things. So when I talk about, and then Neville Chamberlain made a speech where he said, Sparty can probably edit in actual Neville Chamberlain making that speech, and that's a little more hard-hitting. Somebody wrote a question that I'm going to answer. It said, "Have I ever been spanked with a spatula?" I don't think I have ever been spanked with a spatula, but I have spanked someone with a spatula. So that I know.
And now we know that. Wash my brain. So, moving on to the next one. Will you continue?
They had been very bad. They had been very, very bad.
It's you and Stormy Daniels, right?
Sure, why not? Sure.
You're the spankers. So, here's a question from Flaka Fatsliu. I think this came from before we did the streams. And that was, will you continue to do Between Two Wars? Well, we are, and an episode went up yesterday. So, the answer to that is yes, absolutely. And then, here's for you, Indy.
Yeah.
How many more videos based on World War I era are planned? Are there any more projects planned except for World War II? So the first part of the question is,
well, there's an epilogue series that will continue on Thursdays on the Great War for some weeks. I think it'll be over before Christmas, so the war that was over by Christmas. And there's still some Monday specials to come on that, but that'll be wrapping up, for me at least. Mediacraft, maybe they want to do something else with that channel. I don't know, but it won't be me or the gang involved. You know, other projects, we have loads of other projects we want to do. Remember, the first thing, when we started TimeGhost last year, the first thing we did was the Cuban Missile Crisis day by day. So, chronological documentaries, that's what we do. that was one episode per each day of the war. And that was great. It was nice to have like a completed, finished thing that we could present and we could say, this is what we do. We have a whole bunch of plans. The thing we want to do the most is the Korean War. Definitely. That's a great plan. That maybe we'll get to in a couple years when this starts rolling more itself. I mean, I'll have time to write the regular episodes of this and perhaps write another documentary at the same time. I definitely want to do some more baseball stuff. I have an idea for a thing called Dead Ball, which follows the Dead Ball era from 1901 to 1920. Not year by year, but team by team. Going through the Browns, going through, the Cubs and stuff, just for those 20 years. A thing about the Black Death that follows it season by season, spring, summer, autumn, winter, from 1347 to 1351. I have no idea how we're going to illustrate that, because once we get before 1910 or so, we don't have a whole lot of film, and once we go back another 50 years, we don't have a whole lot of photos. So paintings, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But we come up with ideas for, this would be awesome all the time. It's just a matter of getting around to doing them.
But tying into the questions that are rolling up on the screen right now, one of them was, will you cover the Winter War in any detail?
Absolutely. In extensive, exhaustive detail.
And that is also, of course, why we're having a bit of a hard time dealing with new projects right now, because we have so much to do with Between Two Wars and with World War II that getting into a new project at this moment would be really, really difficult. So
the Winter War will be covered here on the World War II channel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
yes, and also a lot of stuff in China, the Sino-Japanese War, and the Chinese Winter Offensive, for example, that starts at the beginning of September. That'll be covered more and more as December and January roll on. And there, a lot of people said, "Oh, you should have started World War II in 1937 when that war began." But I didn't want to do an 8-year project over a 6-year project. But I will be doing flashbacks to explain a lot of how it got to where it is. Same with the Spanish Civil War. So while that will be covered in Between Two Wars, there will be plenty. I mean, we have so much time in this series to go back and cover all that stuff.
And Full Metal Funk asks you actually related
Full Metal Funk.
Full Metal Funk, yeah. What event in World War II are you looking forward to covering the most?
Oh, gosh, that's a tough one. Maybe not an event, but I'm really looking forward to covering. There's nothing I'm not looking forward to covering, but I am looking forward to covering the war in North Africa. My mother's father, my grandfather, he fought with the British Air Force there, and we have his letters and diaries still, and I'm totally going to incorporate that into this once I get there and stuff. So I'm kind of interested to see how that's going to play out.
That leads us to a question that has been asked several times during the day. If we're going to do World War II veteran interviews, I can't say if we are or if we aren't. It's fully possible, but there are definitely people who have already done that and done a better job than we can do.
Yeah.
For the simple reason that they are dying. There's fewer and fewer of them left, and which makes it all the more important for us to do this in order to remember the sacrifices they did to get the world to the point where we could leave that conflict at least behind us. And let's not forget that it is the bloodiest conflict that we have fought so far, and hopefully ever will fight on the globe.
Are we going to cover the Balkans? We're going to cover the entire Second World War. We're not going to just leave out the whole front. If you mean, are we going to cover it in special episodes instead of regular episodes? Probably that too. The only thing we're not going to cover in specials, we'll do national specials. There'll be weapons specials. There'll be specials about. We want to do a whole series about the home front that covers things like the hit music in Britain and in Japan and in China, the films and how these things were affected by the war and how they affected the war. The only thing we won't cover in specials is individual battles, same as the First World War.
And I mean, that actually, the fact of the matter is that answering that question is a little bit difficult, because you have to understand that although both Indy and I, and this goes back to another question I'm going to answer for you because I've answered it so many times today. Indy studied history in college. He has a degree in history. I don't. Nevertheless, we've spent both of our lives dedicated to the study of history in different ways. So we know a lot about what we're talking about. But what we discover every time we start diving into something, it doesn't matter if it's the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Great War or whatever it is, we we don't have the illusion that we know everything. We just know a little bit about a lot of things. But once you start diving into it, you discover things that you hadn't realized before, or when you see them now from this perspective, you realize how much more important they were and how fascinating they were. So it's a little bit hard to answer before we've actually covered the topics that we're dealing with, what is going to be our most favorite thing. Because sometimes it's the most astonishing little details that opens up a whole new world of interesting facts and things that we didn't know ourselves. And we're discovering this very much as we do it. Which leads me to the question to you, Indy.
Yep.
Which is, what would you say is the most astonishing fact about the First World War? And what is the most interesting event of the war?
The most astonishing fact?
I'm gonna grab my Coke, sorry. Yeah.
Astonishing, that's a tough word. There's plenty of weird facts. I mean, the colossal scale of death is unfortunately not astonishing. Although if you saw the bodies, it would be astonishing. Or if you saw the dead horses as well, it would be astonishing. The weird minutiae that you learn are always very interesting. That, well, as we talked about earlier, that Konrad Adenauer, back when he was just the mayor of Cologne, he personally invented soy sausages in his kitchen. That sort of changed the world. We eat soy sausages. Plenty of people eat them today. You can thank Konrad Adenauer for that, because the Germans were starving, and he thought, well, here's something that doesn't involve meat. What was the second half? The most astonishing and most...
the most interesting event.
For me personally, actually, I did not know, not going into the Great War, not until the beginning of this year, how important the events in the Caucasus in 1918 were. The whole reality show of the race for the oil of Baku, when you actually got, this is kind of astonishing, when you know, the Ottoman Empire and the Germans were very, very close allies. They weren't just part of the Central Powers. They were best buds. And by June 1918, with the oil fields of Baku at stake, there were German soldiers and Ottoman soldiers actually fighting each other in the field. I find that astonishing, that you're actually fighting your ally in the field while you're fighting like 15 other countries as well. For me, that was the most interesting stuff to learn, because I had no idea about that. And also the colossal scale of all the other fronts, the Persian front, the Mesopotamian front, the Palestine front, the Libyan front. I'd never heard of the Libyan front until I started researching the actual show. And it is the most forgotten front of World War I. People understand the North African stuff in World War II, but not in the First World War. So sure. And I like the weird stuff, like Spicer Simpson and the Battle for Lake Tanganyika. You should definitely go look up the Battle for Lake Tanganyika or Tanganyika in the search function on World War I if you want to hear a story about one absolute nutcase. Probably the least competent leader in the British Army of the 20th century. I'm willing to give him credit for beyond the First World War. But a very remarkable person, and you know, he did not play by the rules. When he got his boats on Lake Tanganyika, he wanted to name them Dog and Cat. But the British Admiralty said, no, you can't call them Dog and Cat. So he called them Mimi and Fufu, which was okay, so apparently. But I love stories like that. I love the swashbuckling stories like the Emden and the Adventures of the Merve, stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah,
so that leads us right into a rather difficult question. At least I think it's a difficult question. If you had to fight in either World War I or World War II, which war would you fight in?
It depends who I'm fighting with and where I'm fighting, you know?
Well, they didn't. Let's just take it from an Allied perspective in both cases.
From an Allied perspective, suppose I'd rather fight in World War II.
I would agree with that. And from a German perspective, I would say I would rather fight in World War I.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
From an Axis perspective, you can't really say that because the Central Powers is not equal to the Axis, but still. No. So, okay. And that leads me to the next question, which has to do with the brutality of war, and I'll answer that. That is, can YouTube be restrictive on covering some of the most brutal aspects of history, for example, showing footage of battle battles showing death, etc. That's from Onyx, ONYX or Onyx. Onyx. So Onyx, that's an interesting question. It's a question that we have been dealing with YouTube, not for a year, but for 6 years now.
Yeah.
I think we've come to a very great understanding together with YouTube. In the beginning, it was very difficult. I actually escalated that all the way up to Susan Wojcicki's level. Well, it wasn't Susan, actually, it was up to Robert Kinzel's level, one of the bosses at YouTube, because they did take away monetization. They did a lot of weird things with our content because we were showing graphic death and whatnot. And we had a long discussion about it, and everybody at YouTube agreed with us. It was just a question of getting the system to work so that it reflected what the agreement was. The agreement was that as long as we do this responsibly and we're covering it the way that we do, then this is something that is for the better of the platform. It's for the better of the world in many ways.
Sure.
And therefore they will accept it. And now they're even monetizing our content. They can restrict anything they want. It's their platform, and they have the right to do that. This is not, YouTube is not some kind of public square where you can just do whatever you want. It's owned by Google. It's a private, or ABC by Alphabet, and it's a private endeavor. But no, they don't do that because they understand that what we do is an important thing. It's educational, and they accept it and they support it. But I think the word that you need to think of all the time is responsibility. If we started showing gratuitous violence, if we started showing just for the sake of shocking people, then they would most certainly block us. But that's not what we do.
That's not what we do.
And you cannot explain the Holocaust without showing the piles of dead bodies. You cannot explain war without showing dead bodies.
You can't explain World War II without showing swastikas. You just can't. By the way, Sparty, that somebody asked a question. You can feel that they asked if we will be getting money from the EU. Now, you answered a similar question earlier today, how that works with the way they look at the films.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult thing because funding online series is really, really difficult in general. And state subsidies and EU subsidies are very much still oriented towards the old media world. And I've actually worked quite intensely together with the state-run organizations that give out these funds here in Germany and on the EU level in order to find ways, when I was the CEO at MediaCraft, in order to find ways to adapt the subsidy system in the EU to digital media. And so far, that has not worked. They still think of this very much in the way of it being a media endeavor, just like in the old days. So when they put up subsidies for these kind of things, they go out and think of it a little bit as like, we're going to give a little bit of money for people to do a short film on YouTube. They don't understand the structures we're in. There's no real functioning system for it to work that way. And that leads back to why we depend so much on the money that we get from you guys. And again, please don't forget to share the feed here so that we can get more viewers in to understand what we're doing so that we can grow and we can do more cool stuff for all of you.
I'm going to answer two questions that were just up on the screen. Would we consider hiring new teams to cover other projects like the American Civil War? Of course, when we have more money, then we can have more editors. We can have freelance historians writing stuff, so Sparty and I don't have to write everything. I'll be happy to host them. I don't know if we'll do the American Civil War because it's not one of our priorities. And again, once we get before 1900, it's harder with no films and stuff. And somebody also wrote, will we see Angel and Snake on this channel? I certainly hope we will. Angel and Snake, though, belong to MediaCraft, the network that did the Great War. So we'd have to get Angel and Snake from MediaCraft. I don't see why they wouldn't sell them to us, but or give them to us. But I would very much like to. I think Angel and Snake should have their own series. If you don't know who Angel and Snake are, you can use Snake in the search function in the Great War, and you'll find the outtakes when Angel and Snake make their appearances.
So here's a follow-up question to the showing footage, graphic footage, and I can answer that from Solanum Caput. Why is there no battle footage showing the enemy being shot or shot at? Well, there is. It's just not publicly available out of respect online.
Yeah.
And you'd have to go get it out of the archives physically. But more than anything, although there's not that much of it. And the reason is the same reason that there isn't much of that today, if you look at war footage. somebody holding a camera is pretty much a walking target for shots. So while they do, and they put themselves in harm's way, and many died, and we're going to pay them respect during the series, many did die, and unfortunately too many of them died, and it still happens today that too many journalists die on the fronts. There's really no way for a photographer that gets into the fray in that way to live long enough to make any substantial amounts of photography. That's the easy answer. And that leads to just a short excursion into the footage that we use. Almost everything that we use is propaganda for World War II that we have to take out of the context of propaganda and put it into the context of a balanced reporting. Simply because there was no free press reporting. The first time there was free press reporting of a war was actually the Vietnam War. Before that, before World War II, there was no reporting at all directly from the front in any substantial way. That was all staged. So live reporting only really started with actually the Spanish Civil War, but it caught up during the World War II. But these journalists were still embedded, and they were part of the armed forces. So, for instance, Murray was reporting in Great Britain about the war for the U.S., but he was actually, you can see the photos of him, he was in uniform. He was part of the U.S. forces as a journalist. And for the first time, they had portable cameras. So we have all of this footage that we can show you, but it is propaganda footage. We shouldn't forget that. Yeah. One of the rare instances of not having propaganda footage, but really journalistic footage, comes from the occupation of, the siege of Warsaw in 1939, September 1939, where coincidentally an American journalist happened to be there, Julian Bryant, who did a lot of still images and a few kilometers of film as well. And that's what we've been showing you partly. The rest of what we've been showing you from the Polish War is almost everything is from the Wehrmacht. And most of it was captured, some of the still photos not, but most of the moving images were captured by Leni Riefenstahl and her team, who went with the forces on the 1st of September against Goebbels' advice. She said, you won't stomach this. And Goebbels was right. She couldn't take it. She broke down. There's a famous photography where she tries to stop the Wehrmacht from shooting POWs, and an officer holds a gun to her head to get her out and let them do their job.
I'm going to answer a question we got back from Lex Stoit. I don't know who he works for, but he says, can we sponsor you? If you work with some company that we think might fit with us for sponsorship, you can get hold of us through timeghost.tv. Absolutely. So check that out. Sure.
Or write us an email at community@timeghost.tv is another way of doing it. So, would you, I'm not going to go for...
Somebody asked, am I doing codex indexes for Battlefield 5 as well? Myself and Marcus Linke did like half the codex for Battlefield 1, the First World War version. I'm not doing anything for Battlefield 5 so far. I haven't been asked by DICE to do any work with them, and I haven't asked them about that.
Yoram, maybe we can move on from the collab questions and get some other ones in. Now, there's a question here that we can do in the meantime, and it's how do you work around lies perpetuated by Hitler and Mein Kampf, going back to sources, or by extension any primary sources from the Nazis? I'll extend the question. It's not just the Nazis. Everybody was lying. and how do we work around that?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Because you have the histories from the time and beyond that, and even to the modern, that are heavily biased nationally or are heavily biased to one side. You have histories that try to be more even-handed, and you have heavily biased or things with lies like Mein Kampf. How do you do that? You try your best to weed out what's true and what's false, and not just be even-handed, but to also explain, well, this person says this. History has shown us that this is actually not true, and they were lying, and this is the reason why they were lying, because they were trying to drum up this support or trying to convince this of this. I don't know if that's a particularly good answer. So.
Well, I mean, I think I'll just add one thing to it, and it, you know, like with any science, and we debated that this morning, but history is a science. We do have such a thing as emergent truth between the scholars in the field, and these have been put into books. And so we have support from the rest of the community of historians to actually work out what is a lie and what is a truth. So that helps as well.
I want to answer a question the guy's asked it like 5 times. He says, who was the most incompetent general of World War II? I don't know. I haven't written all of World War II. I know a great deal about World War II and what happened in the various parts, but I'll tell you this. Before I had written The Great War, I certainly couldn't even attempted to answer that question. I didn't know all the generals from all the various nations. If you're wondering how far I've written on this channel on World War II, the last episode I've written is the December 29th, 1939 episode. So far, there have been, well, spoilers, Meretskov attacking in the Winter War in the Karelian Isthmus, and not just him, but the first Russian generals, the Soviet generals that were attacking in the Winter War, who were all replaced, and many of them lost their lives too. They were so far as I'm aware, having covered this much of the war, the most incompetent generals I have seen at this point. That answer will probably be totally different by the time I get to 1945.
Okay, and here's a question that I've been asked by so many people, and I will only answer this one more time. We've answered it many times during the day. Will we work with Lindy Beige? We intend to work with Lindy Beige. We do not know how yet. We agreed a few months ago that we were going to wait and see, simply because things turned out to be more complicated than we had hoped for originally when it comes to archive footage, when it comes to how do we share revenues and whatnot. It is really, really complicated. So, and please, we will try to work with Lindy Beige, okay? Yeah.
But not just Lindy Beige. You know, this show is going to be far bigger than it is now. As I said, I'm fairly certain we're going to have 2 regular uploads a week. We're going to have an entire bio series, which is going to be a crossover thing with another big YouTube figure that will work with us. We want to have specials on all the weapons and things, but not me doing the research and writing for those. We want weapons channels and aircraft aviation channels. The Tank Museum Bovington is going to be doing some stuff with us already in December. Ralph Ratz and the Deutsche Panzer Museum, we definitely want to work with them. So yeah, it's going to be, ideally there'll be something coming up every single day, one way or another, beyond just the regular chronological episodes. But that's going to take time, because it's a real shame that it's that tricky to worry about who can use what archive, who has the rights to that, because the archives don't want to just give it away for free. And what about revenue sharing? What about when something's demonetized? How would it work from money that's given to us on Patreon, other channels? So yeah, it's extremely tricky.
Okay, I'm going to answer a personal one here on Yoram's request, because so many people have asked it. First of all, thank you for all of the compliments for my facial hair. And the question is, how did I acquire that magnificent beard and mustache? Well, it was an effect of testosterone and age that led it to grow the way that it did. And then it was an effort of trimming and waxing and doing all of that. So it took me about a year and a half or so to get it to this level, and it's a constant job. But I'm glad you like it.
I'm gonna share a little back pages story. I've actually worn Sparty's facial hair.
No, it was not my facial hair.
Okay.
It was my neck hair.
Well, okay. We were doing a thing. God, a thing like, it was a show like 10 years ago. I was this character named Mr. Zach, who was sort of this used car salesman character for one of our historical things. And I had to paint like these brilliant white teeth and stuff on it. We had this great mustache for Mr. Zach. Well, the mustache had been taken off and was putting its thing in the tray, and the cleaners threw it away, and we didn't realize that until just before we were filming. But we had to film that day because I was going back to Sweden the next day. So using spirit gum and stuff, Sparty cut off pieces of his hair, since it was the right color for that, and we actually glued it to my upper lip. So I've worn Sparty's hair on my upper lip, and I'm not proud to admit it, but it's the truth.
And before we had it the right way, it was a big walrus mustache, and I have a picture of Indy where he looks just like Joseph Stalin.
Yep.
Maybe we'll share that sometime.
Will we make stupid moves, mistakes of the war, 1917, 1918, like we did 1914, 15, and 16 for the Great War? I won't, because my work with the Great War is pretty much done. And I don't think Flo and them will. Again, I don't know if they're just going to wrap up the channel, if they'll do something else with it. Again, Mediacraft owns that channel, not me. So they can do whatever they like with it now. But, you know.
Let's get this one out of the way, Indy, because now we're at attempt number 9. We understand you really want to know. What will you do a special about the Z plan? The German Z plan?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we'll do a special about things like that. For the offensives and the plans, like even the plans that don't pan out, like, you know, Fall Weiss, the attack into Belgium and the Netherlands, that was supposed to happen already, like now, tomorrow. November 12th was the date set for Fall Weiss. It didn't go off for months and months after that, but I still talk about that plan. I don't see why I would not cover any plans that were seriously considered in the regular episode. So I don't think I need to do a special about that.
And while we're on that, will you cover foreign legionnaires and the Wehrmacht and the SS as Satrap Leitdorf? Of course we will. This it's an essential part of the work. I mean, Wehrmacht is a bit more complicated, but the SS is a clear cut. If you don't cover the foreign legionnaires of the SS, you're not covering the SS. 55% of the SS were non-German citizens. You can argue if they were German or not, but I can tell you 100 for 100 that the Scandinavian volunteers, the Lithuanian volunteers and whatnot, were not German. They were definitely Lithuanian or Scandinavian.
This guy, Thomas Elek, has screamed this several times. Estonia and the Baltic states during World War I and World War II. Well, we did a special about the Baltic states during the First World War. There will definitely be specials about them during the Second World War, and events that are relevant to the actual weekly war will be covered during the war. Again, when people say, will you cover the Balkans? Why would I not cover the Baltic states either? I'm not going to leave out a whole chunk of the war. Then I would not be doing, yeah, of course, Fall Gelb, sorry. I would not be doing justice to that. So, yeah.
Okay, now we're gonna take a little short excursion into media. The first one is, where do you guys get the soundtrack for your series? And the answer to that is that it depends on the series. Generally speaking, we use Epidemic Sound, and we use a lot of Johannes Bornelo's compositions for World War II. We also use those for the Great War, for Between Two Wars and for the Great War, there was an Epidemic Sound that was largely the soundtrack. Now for Between Two Wars, we've chosen a lot of original classical music from that time because it is available for us to use, so it's a copyright issue. And the next question to that is, so we're going to segue into how we produce things here in a moment.
Okay.
What are your top 3 favorite World War I films and top 3 World War II films? You can include Band of Brothers, for it is awesome, says Nico.
Oh, well, there you go. Thanks. Thanks. I remember watching Band of Brothers with you. It's the first time I saw that, and it was awesome. That'll definitely be up there. World War I films, even though it can be heavy-handed at times, All Quiet on the Western Front is definitely something that's important. The Iron Cross was really good as well. One thing that really changed my thinking of stuff, if you watch the Wonder Woman film, it was actually Wonder Woman that killed Erich Ludendorff. I had it totally wrong. I thought he survived the end of the war, escaped to Sweden in disguise because he was persona non grata in Germany during the revolution, returned, took part in the Kapp-Lüttwitz coup attempt to take power, failed that one, and then took part in the beer hall push with Hitler and failed at that one. But no, I was wrong. He was killed by Wonder Woman. So that's got to go up there.
I would say so too. I'll add one to the list, and that is actually Saving Private Ryan. I mean, you know, it's a bit spectacular and whatnot, so it's sort of Gary in many ways. But what really, and that's a personal thing, the moment I started, like when World War II history captivated me the first time, I was 8 years old, and I actually witnessed exactly what the beginning of Saving Private Ryan is. It was 1976, and I was standing on the cliffs above Omaha Beach at the memorial, the U.S. Memorial, and I was with my grandparents and my parents and my brother, and there was a guy there standing there, and he starts telling the story of D-Day and how he climbed up, where his friend Bob got shot, and where the machine gun nests were, and he had his kids and his very young grandkids with him. He was probably in his mid-60s by then. And he was just, tears streaming down his face. And that made me realize this is really not so long ago, which, of course, in 1976 it wasn't. So for me, Saving Private Ryan is a really personal, very, very personal thing, because I believe, after what I heard from this guy and how the film starts, that it is a very, very, very accurate telling of how D-Day actually felt.
On a personal level for a World War II film, just because I enjoyed it so much growing up, Kelly's Heroes.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. With Telly Savalas, Clint Eastwood, Donald Sutherland.
Well.
Oh, yeah, of course. No. Oh, wait. Do you guys remember Escape to Victory with Sylvester Stallone and Max von Sydow? Okay, that's the most ridiculous World War II movie, but it's a lot of fun to watch. It is a lot of fun to watch. It's about it's about football. Americans would say soccer, but and the Second World War and Escape to Victory. And Stallone's the American guy on the team. Yeah, but Kelly's Heroes. I love Kelly's Heroes.
Kelly's Heroes is good, great fun. So now we're going to drift into production a little bit. The first question is it's from Nike Yoip. I'm sorry if I'm reading your name wrong. I'm not. I think Nike. Yeah, Nike Ayub? I'm not getting it.
Let's just call him Dave. Yeah. Dave asked.
First, you are great. My question is why you did this project? How came the idea? Was it a moment when you wanted to leave? And please tell us about the pre-production stage and the issues that you had to overcome.
Why this project? Well, okay. Well,
I think we have to go back to World War I, because World War II kind of followed on World War I.
Well, it was really last year, not the summer of 2017, knowing that I only had a year and a half left of the Great War, and thinking, what am I going to do after that as a regular project? I mean, I have other work I do on top of this in different fields, but still. And I knew I wanted to do more work with Sparty and Astrid, so I suggested that we set up the TimeGhost thing. And we did the Cuba Crisis, and then we did a Kickstarter to raise money to build a studio, but we needed to have something that something concrete for that. And I had been asked since the beginning of the Great War, will you do the Second World War? And I thought, you know what, why not? Why not? If it gets us working together like that, it'll be, and it's been a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. I then, say last October, November, December, I thought the First World War was much more interesting just because it was more of a forgotten war, and the Second World War has been covered in so many movies and documentaries and films. But it had never been covered like this, and the staggering amount of detail that I've learned just writing the first 4 months, like the magnetic mind stuff, I mean, that's, which you'll see over the next couple of weeks, it's just insane. So, but that was really what started the idea for this. We were committed to doing it as of last December. I'm going to let you talk about the pre-production and production difficulties. I'm going to use the gentleman's room. Okay?
Wonderful.
Right. Then I shall return shortly.
So I think the biggest challenge that we faced was actually what also was the reason why we're able to do this at all. When we came up with the idea, it was because we had gotten access to the British Pathé Library, thanks to Roger Felber. Thank you, Roger. I suppose you're not watching, but thank you anyway. YouTube had put him in touch with me because he needed help with how to make the British Pathé Archive, which is an archive that goes back to the beginning of cinema, how he could make that more modern and more accessible in the social media world. And when we got access to that, Roger told us, or told me, that he had 3,000 films about World War I, and if we couldn't do something for the Centennial 1914, because this was in 2014. And then I went back to Indy and Astrid, and we talked about it, and then we came up with the idea for how to do the Great War. So that was like the beginning of that whole story, and that was without a doubt the biggest challenge when setting up World War II, because we do not have any way of just, getting we can't do these shows if we don't have images. And there was no easy way for us to get an archive. So we spent the better part of 7 months looking for a suitable archive that was willing to accept the conditions that we can offer, which is based on revenue share. There's no way that we can pay what an archive charges for like television channels, because it would run into the tens of thousands of euros immediately, and we'd be paying thousands of euros for every episode. So it doesn't work. And that was really difficult until, again, Roger stepped in, and Roger helped us get in touch with a new archive. Because meanwhile, Roger had moved on, and British Pathé was not in his hands anymore, and the current owner, the current sole owner, was not willing to do a revenue share deal. So we got hold of an archive through Roger, a new one, which is Reuters. And that happened only a few days before we actually started producing the series. So that was definitely the biggest challenge. Now, we set up a production workflow already for the Great War, which we worked on in the summer of 2014, which is pretty much the one that we use right now in order to get to the point of how can we how can we actually handle all these massive amounts of data and digest it down and get it into these episodes. And the first one is that we have pretty formatted way of dealing with this. So when Indy writes or when I write, we always write according to a certain format that we created back in 2014, which is basically we have a hook, we have a recap, we have an intro, we have segues between each and every one of them. So we're very, very formatted, and that helps us keep us focused. So we spent about 2 days writing an episode, and once it's written, then we go ahead and shoot it, which leads me to the next question. How many episodes do you shoot in a day? And that depends a little bit on how many episodes we've been able to write, but it also depends, of course, on how much Indy's voice can handle. Now, the thing is that Indy is just amazing at delivering, and he's like a machine.
Good with the teleprompter and making it look like I don't read a teleprompter.
So in some cases, we have actually managed to shoot, I think, like 8 or 9 episodes in a day.
Yeah, but then I couldn't do anything the next day because my throat was just
so
shot.
On average, I would say about 4 to 5 episodes a day is what we're clocking in, and that would be World War II episodes. War, like between 2 wars, we cannot do that many in a day. No,
3 or 4, and that's even taking breaks. Now with the Great War, like that did you talk about that production schedule at all?
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool.
And once they are shot, then we move on to filling them with archive, and we're going to change that a little bit, and we want to involve you guys with that. So we're going to reach out and try to get more help from the community. We started testing this a little bit with the Between Two Wars series, and the episode that came out yesterday is an effect of that. We worked together with one of the fans who did a great job and helped us in a big way, Runa from Denmark. And we're going to extend that a little bit, so we're going to have a treasure hunt. We'll tell you more about that later in the show, but we're having a treasure hunt where people can help us to actually find material and go up and really find things that are going on. So once that is done, we spend about 2 to 3 days on a Great War episode or on a World War II episode to edit that, while as Between Two Wars episode is A, harder to research the material, and B, they are longer, so that can take up to 5 days to edit, and then we go ahead to that. And now, while I'm going to do the same thing that Indy did, I'm going to hand over to him with a question that is from Spartan Pants Games. I am a historian, and I'm looking to get into telling history like you guys by way of podcasting or videos. How did you guys get your start, and what keeps you interested in the topics you cover?
Well, the second part of that is very straightforward. We wouldn't cover them if we were going to lose interest. I mean, doing the Great War week by week, I wasn't going to do, after 2 years, I didn't think, this sucks. No, it only got more and more interesting. The trick is, depends what kind of resources you have to start something like that. With the Great War and with those other channels, we had, Sparty was working with Mediacraft, and I pitched ideas to them, and so they financed some ideas. when I did the first YouTube thing I did ever was Sunday Baseball. That was just me and some friends shooting that in a friend's shop, and that was just fine. That was just fun. I think the biggest problem between wanting to do a YouTube channel or a podcast and actually doing it is doing it. People say, "Oh, it'd be really cool to do that," but it takes time, it takes effort, and people tend to not want to put in the time and effort. You, as a historian, you're probably used to actually slogging through materials and stuff, so it should be a bit easier for you to do that. Somebody wrote a question asking, "Will we cover Barbarossa?" No. Absolutely not. Not a word about that. I'm thinking I'm not even going to cover Pearl Harbor. You know, I'm just going to leave those out. Who calls me at the beginning of each World War II episode? That leads to the set design, which people don't realize, although we've mentioned it in like the cribs. It was inspired by Churchill's War Room. If you look up Winston Churchill's War Room on the internet, you can find it looks a lot cooler than our set does, but we didn't have the resources to make our set look like that. And it's got zillions of telephones because you didn't have line 1, line 2, cell phones, call waiting. You had to have separate telephones for each, for each line. We only have the 4. This is the Hut line. It's because Conrad von Hutzendorf is at the end of this line. That's why when I look like this at the beginning of an episode, it's because Conrad is calling me from beyond the grave to tell me something about what he would have done during that part of the Second World War. And it's usually terrible. Conrad is full of terrible ideas. The other 3 phone calls are just, well, one's my dad. The other 2 are just nonsense. Let's call it nonsense. Let's see. What got you more groupies, the Great War or playing in so many bands? Playing in so many bands got me more groupies. I get recognized more often from the Great War now than even, like, I guess the biggest band I played was when I was with Money Brother. And, you know, we had Grammys, gold records, top 10 singles and stuff. And, you know, touring all over Europe. Every single cliche that you think can't possibly be true about playing with a rock band was totally true. We play a show, we finish like midnight at the club or whatever, hang around for a little while, go back to their hotel, and there would be like 30 girls like hanging out at the hotel waiting for us. Yeah, totally. So I totally got more groupies from being in a band than this. I haven't really got any Great War groupies so far. Which is a bit unfortunate. So all you Great War groupies out there and all you World War II groupies out there, I live in Stockholm. Let's see. We've already answered that. Groupies from the Great War are called stalkers. Yeah, okay, I suppose. Yeah, good point. Conrad von Hotzendorf writes, thank you very much. You're welcome, Conrad. Let's see. Let me answer another one. I've been talking about groupies. Who calls it? Would it be possible that you guys employ a trainee that help us produce more videos and stuff? Like an intern and stuff? It would, but again, not at this point, because we don't really know so much. We have some people working. We have Ben and we have Vika working with us, but an actual proper intern, organized properly, I don't know where and how that would work. Once we have a bigger system here, it would be nice to have someone here in Bavaria, obviously, working with editing and stuff here on hand, but we can't be doing that yet.
The answer to that is more or less exactly what Indy said, but we are working on virtual structures because we're spread across the world. Indy's in Stockholm, Sweden, and Vike and Joram are in Utrecht. Ben is in Australia. Now we're going to work together with Biographics in a partnership, and they are in Prague. Yeah. So there's like many possibilities in that way, but I think that for an internship to really, really work, if it's not very specific, like Indy said, they need to be on location. And at the moment, that wouldn't work because we're doing this in my back garden. So
yeah, that answers that question. Why are you in Bavaria? He lives in Bavaria and has a nice back garden. We built a studio here. And what was my first YouTube project? It was called Sunday Baseball, or Watch Sunday Baseball. We made 16 episodes about weird stuff from baseball history. Me, Larry, and Swedish Knock Knock Girl. Which was a really cool character.
Really cool series, actually.
Yeah.
It's fun. You should watch that.
Conrad's groupies are still stuck in the Carpathians. Do you have some more questions for us, Joram?
Mm-hmm.
I think so, yeah.
All right, cool.
Okay. So, let's see here. I'm going down here. Were there much of an attempt to immediately reinstate the monarchy after the abdication by getting William III to take it? question for you?
No, there was not much of an attempt. There was people did try to convince the Kaiser to abdicate in favor of his son. If you saw episode either last week's or the week before, I love Grainer's idea was genius when they're thinking, well, what can we do about this now? And Hindenburg and people were talking about maybe you should abdicate in favor of your son. You know, we got to work more with this whole democratic government idea to show them that, you know. But Grainer's idea was, hey, Willie. I don't think he called him Willie, but I'll call him Willie.
Bill,
call
probably,
him Bill,
maybe.
Kaiser Bill. Hey,
Yeah.
Bill, here's an idea. Why don't you go to the front and get yourself killed? You can pick any sector of the front, get yourself killed, a fighting death. It will rally the people to you, and then it will rally them to your son, and it will preserve the hereditary of the monarchy. Or even if you just get really badly wounded, that would be the same thing. Martin Gilbert wrote in his thing. It said Hindenburg did not think it was a good idea. It is not recorded what Kaiser Wilhelm thought of this idea. So, you know.
And Jotter Purga wrote that I would love to hear about the German politics since the Armistice and the signing of a new constitution in Weimar. We've covered that in between two wars. We've actually covered it extensively. We have a whole episode on the German Revolution, which we called the German Civil War at many points, because it was a civil war in many ways. And we also cover it during the episodes when we're talking about the Eastern fronts that pop up in 1918, 19, and 20. So, you know, go to Between Two Wars and you'll get your fill about that. And we also cover how the Central Powers tried to maintain some degree of control, although we haven't dealt very much with Austria-Hungary.
No,
we will get there as well. And we are, in the upcoming episode about the Greco-Turkish War, we also talk about the control that they tried to get there. Now, here's an interesting question that is a little bit of a debate. Well, actually, let me get some technical ones out of the way first. We've got questions about subtitles that you've posted and haven't been approved by us. I can only say we're so sorry. This is just a question of, like, right now, Yoram is only on board full-time since
like a week ago.
Like a week ago, and only effectively since yesterday, so it's been me doing all of that alone. I just haven't had time to deal with the clearance of subtitles and to get them cleared up, because I have to do that by hand, and I'm so swamped with work that I'm not getting to it. We will get better at it, and we'll start doing that, so that because they require us pressing a button in order to let them go.
Yeah.
And when there's like 6 or 7 of them and so many videos, it gets or sometimes 12 or so. System's not great on that level. And then Grimalek said that you've signed up on Patreon and are wondering how to gain access to the TimeGhost rewards. Are there plans for TimeGhost TV to logins to be sent out? Also, are there plans to do a cool members event? We want to do members events. We're still working on. We have to change our award schedule a bit because it's not quite reflective of what happened when we started doing World War II.
Yeah, it was more what we were thinking.
Before we decided to do World War II. So we're going to come out with a new plan for that this coming week because now everybody's here in Bavaria and we can deal with it. The access to TimeGhost TV is currently done manually. Sampat, who helps us with the technical stuff, was only able to upload and do the manual part for whoever had signed up until about a week ago, a few days ago. So they should be already out and should have gotten an email. Whoever's new, we're going to try to catch up. We're setting up a workflow to do that. The reason for that is that the API that Patreon hands us in order to do that was changed, and they deleted the old API that we had integrated, and we just have not had a chance to integrate a new one. We're working on it. We're going to get there. Now, to the question that is more of an interesting debate, actually, than a question. I don't know if there's a clear answer to this, but I guess we can give you our opinion, starting with you, Indy. Are video games involving the wars a good tribute or a bad ripoff? Are they a good thing, a necessary evil, or just bad? And value your use of popular representation of history in general.
I'll say straight off that they're not a bad thing. They're a good thing for the simple fact that, particularly with people that are younger, people in their early teens and stuff, playing, I don't know, a Second World War game or whatever war you happen to choose, can lead to an interest in actually learning the accurate or correct or more of the history about that, and that cannot possibly be a bad thing. it's not possible for a video game to accurately represent how the world. If you did World War I, I mean, Verdun is about as accurate as you can be, and they're really cool guys, the Verdun guys. But still, that's not how the war was. The war was you turned up, you were behind the front you'd been trained for 6 weeks or something. You were behind the front for 3 weeks. You got rotated in the lines. You did nothing at all for 2 weeks under heavy artillery fire. You went over the top, and then 20 seconds later, you were dead. And then you'd have to start again. That would be you playing World War I. Nobody would buy that game to play that game. So you have to make it exciting. You have to take liberties. Sometimes they take too much liberties, sure. I don't even have a problem with them being agnostic with weapons. Like in Battlefield 1, the Germans can have a Lewis gun. Okay? Fine with me. You might want to take the time to learn what a Lewis gun is because your guy has a Lewis gun. So you Google it and you learn about a Lewis gun. And you've learned something there. So, yeah.
And I think, I mean, what I would add to that is that the whole debate, are they necessary evil or are they just bad or something, goes back to what we in the media industry face since many decades now. And that is the debate, are we glorifying violence? Is violent society a result of the media violence, shoot 'em up games and whatnot? There is... I spend a lot of time with this because I've worked together with the Youth Protection Services and with the voluntary age censorship here in Germany and also in Sweden when I was producing stuff back in the 90s. There's no research that shows that this is the case, that consuming violent games or anything like that leads to violence.
Well, one way to really look at that when people talk about like gun deaths and things and stuff, and I'm not going to get into a debate either side because our views on current events have nothing to do with our views on this channel. But, I mean, nobody plays more violent video games than the Japanese. The anime, the violence in the cartoons and stuff is just crazy, and yet they have, what, 8 gun deaths a year? Something like that, some ridiculously low murder rate. You can't I'm sorry, if violent video games were a cause for people going out and committing the same violence, in countries like that, there would be more violence, and there isn't.
That is the truth. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, and that leads us to more questions here, you know, war and violence, taking the step to go there is such a difficult thing. And we shouldn't forget that the people who were involved in this, the poor soldiers on the front, they might have gone there voluntarily in the beginning, but as the war progressed, both World War I and by the time World War II hit, that was already common knowledge, it became so clear to everyone that it was a horror. So if they wouldn't have been legally required to, under the force of death penalty and things like that, many people would not have gone there, which leads to the question that we got here. And Cross 88 asks, among the soldiers, how common was the idea that because peace was right around the corner, they should fight conservatively and try to hold out? And Anna Samuel asks, were there any mutinies by soldiers when they were asked to fight when the clock was approaching 11 a.m.?
There were mutinies by soldiers from the first big mutiny in the First World War was the Singapore Mutiny, and that was in February 1915. There were mutinies more and more often through the war. So there were, yeah, people, it's a hard thing to take your gun, go over the top, and run towards an enemy and shoot them and stuff. Yeah,
That happened, that continued happening through the war. And actually, since you asked, were there, a common idea was that because peace was around the corner, they fought conservatively. They most certainly didn't. They unfortunately, they didn't at all. The last deaths happened only minutes before, or in the minute before 11 o'clock. And in the morning of the 11th of November, there was a very controversial order on the U.S. side, which led to the last attack by the U.S. on this morning 100 years ago, and also cost both American and German lives. And that led to a congressional hearing that found the officers to be at fault for not having paid attention to the fact that the armistice had been agreed upon and that this attack was a senseless attack that cost lives on both sides.
For no reason.
But they did. They did do the attack because they had no choice. I mean, they would have faced court-martial. They would have faced potentially being shot, even if it would have been an unnecessary order. So, you know, you have no choice. You do it.
We did get the question there. What is the average airspeed of an unladen swallow? What do you mean, European or African?
And is it carrying a nut or without a nut?
but my answer is actually the answer you should give. Is you mean European? All right. Okay. So don't listen to him. Yeah. So the World War I is over now. Well, the war in the field is over now. 100 years ago, there's still 5 peace treaties that need to be hammered out, and every single country that was fighting in World War I for the next few years, at some point, is going to be involved in war or civil war, except for the United States and some of the British, the British dominions. But the French and the British themselves, they're going to be at war. Everyone in Eastern Europe, all the broken up parts of Austria and Hungary, Germany, the former Ottoman Empire, everybody's going to be fighting. The Russian Civil War, it was not the war to end all wars. It turned out to be the war to create a whole bunch of smaller wars. But that's how you remake the world.
Okay, and before we take another break to go eat something, because there was a question that did we have a nice dinner? No, we didn't. We haven't had a dinner at all yet. So we're going to go get some dinner, and then we're going to come back with a glass of wine and continue again in about an hour. But before we do that, we will answer a couple of questions regarding the end of the war. Now, when did the cleanup start, and how did it work? With the mines, barbed wire, bodies, etc. How was that cleanup orchestrated? Wow. Now, that cleanup is still ongoing.
Yeah.
It was not very well orchestrated at all because it was such a mess. That goes both for World War II and World War I, actually, that to this day, here in Germany and in France and in Belgium and all over Europe, we are facing, and same goes for China as well, as a matter of fact, we have annual deaths by mines and by bombs and grenades that are buried in the ground, and
there's poisoned land. You can't farm certain land. There's land that's you don't realize when you have millions and millions of artillery shell or remnants of poison gas that seeps into the land, you've destroyed the land. It's not so much a question of how do you reclaim it. It's a question of plenty of that land people didn't want to reclaim.
I mean, it's just it's not that long ago that we had a big explosion in France in one of the buried English mines that went off.
Yeah.
And it's a poor farmer who was like, had forgotten. I mean, it was all marked out once upon a time on a map, but over a century, things get forgotten, and they'd forgotten it was there. And he started digging in the ground, and boom, he went up. And here in Germany, actually, funny. Not at all funny story, but you can see it online if you look it up. It's about 4 years ago or so.
Just this year, a guy in Romania died that uncovered a bomb underground.
Yeah, and here in Munich, Munich, like most German cities, was bombed to smithereens to like 98, I think 89% here in Munich. Munich in the city was destroyed. And they were building an apartment complex, and they found a huge amount or a huge bomb. It was a 500 kilogram bomb that had landed deep and not gone off. And they started clearing it out, and they realized that it was so rusted that they weren't going to be able to actually disarm it. So as they couldn't disarm it, they decided that they were going to blow it up in a controlled explosion. Now, that controlled explosion went wrong. They evacuated about 3,000 people from their buildings. It exploded. And it was right in front of the brand new offices of Constantin Film, which is the biggest film distributor here, where Anna, our daughter, works, and we're very good friends with the people who do that. And a few months later, I visited them in their offices, and the conference room we were in had been so badly shook by the bomb that the whole frame of the wall had moved 60 centimeters, and the house was partly condemned, as were many buildings around it. And that explosion is online. They filmed it, some people who were further away from the evacuation. And it was huge. And this is still ongoing. So the cleanup started immediately, but it didn't go very well.
Indy, why do you always roll up your sleeves? I genuinely don't know how to answer that. I suppose I started to for the first few episodes of The Great War, and since I had the look then, the same outfit and stuff, I just kept doing it. This seemed to make sense. I also want to show off my, my beautiful arms and stuff.
Your guns.
Well, we're going to go have dinner anyway, right?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we'll get back, and we'll catch up on the questions when we're back in about an hour. We're gonna call out the evening with you, and thank you for listening so far. And please remember, advertise that we're going to be here again at around 9 o'clock. We're going to be back for another hour or two of answering questions and talking. We love you guys. and we really appreciate the fact that you're here with us and that many of you have stuck with us for another 2 hours, and then we'll be back with that. Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
See you guys. All right, Yoram, cut it.
No, I have to cut it.
Okay, don't cut it, Yoram.
Okay.
All right, Sparty, cut it.
I'm doing it.